right, welcome, First Lego League. Today we have the opportunity to tour the Structures and Materials Lab here at NASA Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. So why don't you guys follow me? I'll introduce you to our computer scientists. Here we have with us David Mercer. Like I said, he's the computer scientist. He's going to give us a tour of his facility and give us a snapshot of the work that he does here at NASA Langley. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to David.
Good afternoon. Follow me. First one, we're going to start at what we have, the Orion capsule. It's about the size of the Orion capsule. So we'll give you a chance to see how the astronauts would actually travel into space. So this is actually a full cell scale value of the size of the Orion capsule. So I want you to take a look on the inside. We're talking about 4 astronauts living in this while they're traveling to Mars or the moon. The moon's about 2 days. Mars upper between 3 months and 9 months. So there's no way they're going to be able to live in here for 9 months. So you take a look at it. Not a lot of space. Of course, this is without any of the outfitting of the chairs and all the other stuff that goes along with it, computer instruments and everything. So not very much space. So they got to have a bigger area to live in. So some of the things we think about the habitat, not only for the surface, but we also think about it while traveling to Mars. That's a long term. So follow me, and I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things we're doing in Ireland. And one of the things we've been told, we want our habitats to last for 20 years. So what we wanted to do is do inflatable habitats. And the reason it's not because of inflatable habitats is you see the size of that Orion capsule. The rocket below it is a certain size. You can only carry a certain amount of payload in that area. So you want to be able to expand that living capability. That's where the inflatable comes into play. So the big thing that we do in here is structure testing. And we have straps that hold that inflatable portion. We have a bladder on the inside. We have straps that go around. And you'll get to see that as we go down here. But I want to talk about some of the things that we're doing here to speed up that process. We actually have straps hanging with weights on the end of it. They've been going about 5 years now, a little bit longer than that. And that's a long time. It's creeping along real slow, but we have actually test stands that we're running what we call accelerated creep testing. And so those test stands, we're able to do it in a couple of days or less, maybe a couple hours. So that makes it a whole lot faster. 20 years, hopefully we'll be at the moon before then. So I want to show you a couple of the test stands that we do. If you look over here, we're actually having one of our test stands. You see where a strap can actually go into it. We have actually cameras mounted up on the side here with pictures going against that. Let's see if we have one here. Here's the actual strap. This one isn't, probably hadn't been tested yet, but will be tested. And I'll show you a couple of failed test specimens too. So follow me on down. So as you can see over here is our inflatable habitat. This is another item altogether, but this is what it's going to look like. Look, here's our strap. Here's one that's actually failed. And if you can see, it's actually painted white with black specks on the end of it, right in this area here. That's where we can use those cameras that I was talking about, and we can measure the strain across the whole thing. So what we normally would do is have little gauges on here, and they can only measure that one area. This gives you the whole picture, the whole cost there. So not only straps, as far as we're testing different types of straps, which one's the better strap. We're also testing, notice this has got sewing patterns. We have a sewing machine here. We have engineers that actually get to go do sewing, so that's where it's strained. But yeah, we have to worry about that. What would happen if stitches were missing? What happens if the straps got cut? So we're actually testing all those those different type of things here. We want to make sure they last. We have to make sure that it can handle that problem if it did occur. We're also looking at what we call an inflatable air interlock. We'll go in this particular hab. We have a hard shell air interlock. And the air interlock area is where the astronauts actually put on their uniforms, they close the door, suck all the air out, and if they're on the moon, they can go on out. If they're on Mars, they vent Martian atmosphere in, then they will exit. So if you can reduce that amount of weight and have that inflatable, you save a lot of money. I've heard $10,000 per pound. So it's very expensive. So that's one of the things. But you can have some wear where it would actually have a skeleton on the inside and it wear against that skeleton. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen. So we're actually testing that particular part. Other things that we have to worry about is radiation. So how can we protect the astronauts from radiation? There's both cosmic radiation, that's a whole different beast. A lot of them don't understand yet, and we're trying to get our grips around it. But there's also solar radiation. And they got a little bit better understanding of that, but they also have to worry about solar storms. So they have a certain amount of area that they have protected during regular exposures, but then they have to worry about solar storms. So we'll have inside, when you'll see, there's actually what we call a storm shelter. And it's partially built up, and then they would build the rest of it up as they go on. So some of it's mainly when you're in travel, because these storms can happen and they can last up to 36 hours, or the astronauts can not come out of there, but maybe 5 times at 15-minute intervals because they don't want to expose them to that radiation. So small space, but you want to be able to protect the astronauts. So the best source of radiation protection is water. So we want to be taking plenty of water, and as you know, they're going to be recycled. And all that, you know what that means all together, right? And then also they're looking at food, packaging of food. You'll see some of the packaging in the food. It's very similar to what the military uses, but it's in this package. They find that that actually provides excellent radiation protection. The other thing they're looking at is waste. You're going to be reducing waste, not only human waste, but other waste, like the material that the packaging that the food comes in. Maybe even the clothing that they wear. They can only use that clothing for a certain amount of time. They're not going to have washing machines there. They're going to be utilized. So the clothes will be worn, all stuff, everything. Vacuum seal it, and use that as radiation protection. So we want to make sure that. Other thing they have to worry about, not only on the moon, Mars, as in space too, is micrometeorites. So they have to protect that. So they have materials where they want to say, somewhat like this, as it penetrates in, it slows it down and it breaks it up into smaller particles. And then as it goes through different layers, it continues to do the same thing, so it never penetrates the bladder of the habitat. So we want to protect those. So some of the things we do for space, we may have to do for on the surface, but we may also be able to do it a different way. There is looking at ways where you can completely cover it, building like a shed over top of it, throwing dirt over basically lunar surface or Martian surface over the top of it, building like a cave for it. Other is that on Mars, there may be some lava tubes that you can actually put it into that lava tube, providing that radiation protection and all the other protection that you need. So you don't have to carry it with you. So they're looking at all kinds of things to help protect the astronauts from this radiation. So give them the best protection that they can have. So we want to make sure that. So how about if we go inside and see what the habitat looks like? So one of the things that may be I always think about it is they may have astronauts not as tall. They want the tall people in there. And of course, they may not have completely short people, but so I'm sort of vertically challenged, so I don't have to worry about hitting my head. But this is would be something what the astronauts have to never learn. So this is the air interlock area right here, not very big. I think of it like the mudroom of a house. So you have your dirty parts here. You don't want the rest of it to be infected with all the dirt. from the surface of the moon or Mars, so you want to protect that area. So this would be that area, which could actually be an inflatable version. So you may not see this metal type shed, but this is basically a mock-up of what it would be, first generation of it. So we wanted to see that. And here's the living area. Not very big. Of course, going to Mars, you may have something a little bit bigger than this. On the surface of Moon and Mars, you may have several of these. They have a calculation that they have determined what the size astronauts can live in. You know, they have to have a certain amount of space. They can't be with everybody the whole time. So you're talking about 4 astronauts going to Mars. So you want to be good friends with them, of course, but you may want some alone time. So you don't want to be surrounded by them the whole time. So this is one of the things that they look into for the astronauts and how much size that they need. So packaging of the food would be very similar to this that I was talking about. This is what it looks like. This is teriyaki beef steak. It's yummy, right? How many would want to eat this all the time? Not me. So one of the things that they found out about the International Space Station, the crew there, they like their food a little bit spicier because I guess the lack of gravity, your taste buds change. So they like spicier food. So they actually have a contest for coming up with food. They have high school students that participate and come up with different ideas. And the winning group gets to send their food up to the astronauts on the International Space Station. So that's pretty cool, I think, you know, to be able to do something like that. That doesn't look very yummy. They actually get fresh fruit every so often with a new supply, and man, they're happy about that. So they're looking at growing stuff. They've grown some food up in space, and so they would look at doing something like that on the moon, maybe even Mars too. So you want to do that. So this is the shelter that I was talking about. So if you can sort of scroll around, this is the part that would actually be already made up, and then later on you would take and build a cross. I can't see my hands as far as building across, but you build all the way across to the other side. And you have somewhere to store it. If you show this picture right here, it gives you a good idea. So that's some of the stuff. I think they want to have some time so you can have some question and answer. I see it's about 5 after, so I may have gone a little bit long. So I just want to give you some time to ask questions.
Very good. Yes. So, David, thank you so much for this time this afternoon just to be able to experience the work that you do and what goes into us being able to successfully travel through deep space. And so these are the things that are happening now. Think about what's going to be happening in the next 10 years or so. So I want you guys to be mindful of that. So some of the questions that came through is what would happen if there was a hole in the inflatable habitat?
So they've got to make sure there is never a hole. So they're going to, so some of the things that they do, if you think about ratings for astronauts, you deal with 4 times factor. So if it can survive 100 pounds, it's going to have to survive 400 pounds. So we have a factor of safety built in. So we have to make sure that that never occurs. So we would never have that occurring. We have to build in protection to be able to keep that. Because there's in space, you basically, I think your blood boils right away. On the moon, it would be the same way. Mars is carbon dioxide. It gets up to 70 degrees around certain time frames, minus like 150. So you'll probably freeze and suffocate. So you can't have anything like that occur.
That's really good to know. And I know that NASA's primary objective and goal is to ensure that our astronauts are safe. And so we want to make sure that before we even put our astronauts at risk, that there is no risk. And so that's what David is talking about, is ensuring that if there was a chance to have a hole in an inflatable habitat, that could not affect the astronauts' safety. So think about that as you guys are accomplishing your challenge for the first LEGO League. Really good question. So the next question that I have is, how do the inflatable habitats protect from radiation?
There's, like I said before, is one of the things, if they're on the surface on the moon or Mars, they could actually build sort of a shed over across there, or they could actually go into a lava tube or on Mars. But for traveling wise, they would have to have some kind of a blanket. And then you may have seen it when she panned out, as far as they have, it's all a blanket around. So they would have some kind of like a blanket across there to prevent any radiation protection, put that radiation protection around the asteroid.
That's good. It reminds me of, if any of you have had the opportunity to get an X-ray, they usually put something over your chest to protect your internal organs before that type of communication comes in to take a picture of your skeleton. So think about that if you've ever had that opportunity. The other question, yeah, oh, perfect. So
she just mentioned that.
Yeah.
This is sort of an idea that they were looking at for the astronauts as far as during that sort of radiation storm. Very similar to that leaded vest that you put on when you're at the dentist and getting the x-rays for your teeth. It protects the main organs. They would have something for the head too, but this was the main organs. This is a similar to like the lead base that you have for the x-ray, but it's not as a polymer material that they have created. Astronauts didn't like the way it looked. I thought it looked like a samurai soldier.
Mm-hmm.
So actually one of the astronauts that came through, or astronaut candidate came through and said, hey, I like it. It looks like a samurai soldier. So I wasn't the only one, but it is very good for solar radiation. But from what I understand, cosmic radiation is not. It actually makes the particles smaller, easy to penetrate your body. So good for one, bad for the other. Maybe not. And plus it weighs a lot. So getting it up to space would cost a lot to get there, but we would probably not have a problem because it's for the astronaut.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yes.
That's good. So as we've moved throughout your facility and the work that you've done, can you talk a little bit more about the structures and the materials that you're testing? I know you mentioned it earlier where for 5 years, you're looking at how certain materials are worn down based on certain, I guess, conditions. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Okay. So we have looked at several different materials as far as those straps, and we actually put the weights that they can actually supposedly take. They handle that amount for maybe a couple of weeks. So they don't last the whole time holding that particular amount of weight. We're never going to be putting that amount on there. So we're, like I said, is 4 times safety factor. So we're never going to do that. We've gone down to like 50%, and they lasted a couple months, and then we were in the range of 20 to 40% of what they said they can. And like I said, they've been lasting over 5 years. We actually do, like I said before, cuts in the sides, cuts in the middle. They actually cut it in a vertical direction, and it has very little effect on that pre-touch.
Very good. Are you looking at different composites that can go into these straps?
Not that I know of. I think they're looking at that because they really don't need any extra composites in there to do this. They're coming up with off-the-shelf items. So there is that they would have the extra material protection-wise. It would be the radiation protection. Micrometeorite protection would be the areas. So that it actually gets protected because it's on the inside. Think of your house. You have the inside is being a bladder, is what we have here. Yours is drywall. And then the straps are the 2x4s that hold that drywall in place. On the outside, you have plywood. Then you have either brick or vinyl siding or something like that on the outside. And that's that radiation protection, micrometeorite protection. And then you also have some insulation in between because, like I said before, it gets very cold, very hot on the moon. And then same as Mars, it doesn't get very hot, but it gets very cold. So you want to have that insulation to help you get it from getting too hot or too cold.
That's really good. So as we're talking about this, what I wanted to make sure that we were able to do is address any questions that any of you may have. Does anybody have a question that they have? And I'm just looking on the screen.
One of our questions that's been asked is, what is the material made of for the different parts of the house? What would the outer habitat be made out of, and what would the inner habitat be made
I've heard, well, I know the Express, because Vetran is the main one as far as that. Other people work on the other portions, so that I do not. So I think
we can find the answer, so no worries at all. Any other questions that have come through?
so one of the other things we had problems with as far as this particular one is inflating. And so we actually did a test of inflating it. And you may have saw when you're panning through that there was windows on the sides. Those windows are very heavy. You have probably leaded like glass inside. You probably won't have that on the final version of that. You don't need windows because you're going to use cameras as your way of looking out, and you want those protections. And so that's the area that could actually, cause problems where you have that. Well, it all fell out when we started expanding. Surface on the moon is very sharp. The particles are very sharp. They've gotten better on Mars, knowing that with the rovers, but not quite the same. We had lunar surface brought back to Earth. I got to hold it in my hand. I had a cylinder, but it was in my hand, so I got to hold it one time for another project. But very sharp particles, cuts it, so you don't want anything to happen to your habitat. So we found out we needed supports above as far as keep it from falling down, and then expanded at a slower rate, and we were very successful our second time. So we do a lot of testing. This is Langley Research Center, and I like to specify we do research. And so not every time are we successful. So we want to get it as far as close as we can, and then narrow it down so we get that successful attempt at it.
And I'll piggyback off that because as in the education, what we want to emphasize with students is that in order to get it right, you have to get it wrong. And so a lot of what Langley does is we look into ways that we don't want to fail when we are trying to send astronauts to Mars. What we want to do is get it wrong on the surface so we can learn from the mistakes and then make it better so that we can understand how it will be when we are on our mission to Mars or to the moon. So these are things that we want students to understand as we are navigating these next few generations, especially with space travel. So something to think about, definitely something to think about. Any last parting thoughts that you may have for the first LEGO League students who are connecting with us? Ooh, I think I have Lindsay who has a question. Lindsay, come on over here.
Would you be willing to live in this habitat?
Good question.
I would be willing to go to the moon and live there for a short period of time. Mars, I don't think I want to go. 3 to 9 months, I wouldn't mind doing that. That would be very interesting.
Yeah.
I think it would be pretty fun.
Yeah. So that's short duration, but yeah, that is something we have to think about as we are traveling to Mars. We're thinking of like David said, that 6 to 9 months journey on the way to Mars. Yeah, there's some things we may not have access to certain technology. We may not be able to have our devices. So then we have to keep our minds occupied during that time frame. So think about those things as you are trying to solve the problems for your challenge. So I tell you what, David, we're very grateful for this time this afternoon. Thank you so much for showing everything you've got here in your facility and with our students here from the First LEGO League. I know that they're very grateful. So thank you all for connecting with us this afternoon. We hope that this has provided you a lot of answers to your questions. If you have anything else that you may have questions about, please feel free to check out the NASA First website that can give you more insight into those questions.
So if you hear a bang, and hopefully we may hear it, but they're actually doing a test out there in the lab. So you saw maybe the 2 test stands. One was the one that I actually will have to know in strap testing. Another one is they're actually doing the test. We did not stop them from doing their test. They wanted to.
They kept going. They kept going. That's
so
really
you may hear a bang.
Yeah, that's really good. So last thing I want to part with is we will be offering another 2 webinars in this series of 4. We will be exploring other facilities here at NASA Langley, answering questions that you may have about your challenge. And we're so grateful that you took the time this afternoon to spend with us and with David for Very thankful for his time and expertise to get a snapshot of his work. So thank you guys for being here with us inside of the inflatable habitat. Look forward to seeing you soon.